When the first wave hits, you won't have time to debate where to go. The streets will flood with panicked masses within hours, maybe minutes. Every grocery store becomes a battlefield. Every gas station, a death trap. And while everyone else is scrambling toward the obvious choices, the wilderness cabin, the military base, the shopping mall, you need to understand something fundamental. The best survival locations are where people think they are. They're where science, psychology, and brutal pragmatism intersect. This isn't about romantic notions of surviving in the woods. This is about the cold mathematics of staying alive when society tears itself apart at the seams. The first truth you need to accept is that most survival advice will get you killed. The mountaintop retreat sounds perfect until you realize you re-trapped there with no supply lines and 100 desperate people who saw the same YouTube video. The urban warehouse seems defensible until a coordinated group with actual tactical experience decides they want it more than you do. Real survival locations work because they exploit specific scientific principles: resource accessibility, defensive geometry, psychological invisibility, and sustainable isolation. Let's break down the actual hierarchy of survival positions, rated not by fantasy but by physics and human behavior patterns. At the bottom of the viability scale, abandon any thought of major coastal cities. Miami, New York, Los Angeles, these are mass graves waiting to happen. The population density alone creates an impossible resource-to-human ratio. Within 72 hours, every edible item within a 5-mile radius gets consumed. Water treatment fails. Sewage backs up. Disease vectors multiply exponentially. The coastal position offers no strategic advantage when maritime escape becomes impossible due to fuel scarcity and the sheer number of people with the same idea. You're looking at a minimum of 3 weeks before stabilization even begins, and you won't make it 3 days in that environment. Slightly higher on the survival curve are suburban developments, but only specific configurations. Standard suburban sprawl offers poor defensive positions and limited resource density. However, older suburbs built in the 1950s and 60s often sit on separate well systems and have mature fruit trees, forgotten root cellars, and interconnected basement networks that newer construction lacks. The key is finding a neighborhood with mixed-generation housing where knowledge of old infrastructure still exists. Among elderly residents, these locations provide temporary staging grounds but lack long-term sustainability. Rate them as 14-day positions maximum. The wilderness cabin, everyone fantasizes about, ranks surprisingly low for actual survival probability. Yes, you avoid initial population chaos, but you've also isolated yourself from the industrial remnants that enable long-term survival. No antibiotics, no metal tools beyond what you carried. No way to repair solar panels or water filters. Winter becomes a death sentence without modern insulation and heating. The remote cabin works only if you've spent years building a sustainable infrastructure there, and even then, you're vulnerable to roving groups who've exhausted easier targets. The mathematics are simple. One person can defend against maybe 2 attackers with preparation. Against 5 or more, your isolated position becomes your tomb. Now we move into genuinely viable locations. Large university campuses with agricultural programs and engineering facilities rank remarkably high. These sites contain concentrated knowledge repositories, machine shops, greenhouses, and often independent power generation. The population density seems problematic until you understand the selection effect. Universities attract problem solvers, not just survivors. The social organization potential exceeds random population groups by orders of magnitude. The key is arriving within the first 12 hours, before territorial claims solidify, and immediately integrating with technical departments. Chemistry labs provide water purification capabilities. Engineering shops enable tool production. Agricultural facilities offer seed banks and growing knowledge. Security comes from numbers and organization rather than isolation. The university becomes a small city-state with actual production capability. Moving higher, we find military installations, but with critical caveats. Active bases will be locked down and potentially hostile to civilian refugees. However, decommissioned bases and National Guard facilities in secondary cities offer extraordinary advantages. These locations feature reinforced structures, existing defensive perimeters, backup power systems, and often overlooked supply caches. The psychology works in your favor. Most people avoid military sites assuming they're either occupied or stripped clean. In reality, the bureaucratic complexity of military logistics means significant resources get abandoned during base closures. Knowing which installations closed within the last decade and have been fully reclaimed gives you access to infrastructure that would take years to replicate. The defensive geometry of these sites makes them holdable by small groups against much larger forces. But the real secret, the location that combines every survival advantage into one package, is something most people never consider: municipal water treatment facilities in cities of 50 to 100,000 population. Follow the logic. These facilities are built like fortresses because they're critical infrastructure. They're staffed by engineers who understand complex systems. They have backup power generation. They control the single most critical resource for human survival. The population size of mid-sized cities creates a Goldilocks zone, large enough for skill diversity and resource availability, small enough to avoid the instant collapse of megalopolises. Most importantly, these facilities become natural gathering points for anyone with technical knowledge and long-term thinking. The psychological edge here cannot be overstated. While everyone else fights over food in the first week, you've secured water. Humans can survive 3 weeks without food but only 3 days without water. Controlling water means controlling negotiations, trade, and ultimately, social reorganization. The treatment facility gives you leverage that no amount of canned goods can match. You're not hiding, you're not defending a static position. You're controlling infrastructure, which means controlling the future of your region. The real survivor understands that location selection isn't about hiding until rescue arrives. No rescue is coming. It's about positioning yourself at the nexus of resources, defensibility, and social reorganization potential. It's about being where the next phase of civilization rebuilds, not where the last phase collapses. The water treatment facility, the university campus, the decommissioned military base, these locations work because they're where infrastructure meets human capital. Island locations in the Great Lakes or large river systems rank near the top as well, particularly islands with existing small communities and agricultural history. The water barrier provides natural defense while maintaining accessibility via boat. Island populations historically develop strong cooperation patterns because isolation forces interdependence. The freshwater access solves the primary resource problem, while the limited land area enforces sustainable population density. You're looking for islands between 20 and 200 acres large enough for agriculture, small enough for defense and social cohesion. Here's what separates you from the 99% who won't make it. You're rereading this now, which means you're planning now. The best survival location is worthless if you're trying to reach it on day 3, when every highway is a parking lot and every bridge a choke point. You need to identify your optimal location today. Visit it, map it, cache supplies there if possible, establish relationships with current residents. When the catastrophic hook becomes reality, you need to move in the first 6 hours, before the psychological break happens, before the grocery store's empty, before the defensive positions get claimed. The final warning is this: location is multiplied by preparation, not added to it. The perfect fortress means nothing without water purification, knowledge, medical skills, food production, capability, and the psychological resilience to make brutal decisions. Your survival location must be reached before others recognize its value. Fortified before desperation drives masses toward any perceived safety, and operated with the understanding that you're not waiting out a disaster. You're building the foundation of what comes next. The survivors won't be the ones who hid the best. They'll be the ones who understood that survival is about positioning, timing, and the cold mathematics of resource control. Every hour you delay that understanding is an hour you re-choosing to be a victim instead of a survivor. Choose now. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.